On June 28, 1883, a sealed package began its journey into a brokerâ Euro-S safe near Broadway and Fulton Street. Bertha Heyman said it represented wealth. Edward Saunders and his partner treated it as security, advanced her cash, and surrendered a diamond. When the wrapping was opened, the supposed securities were worthless paper. Yet the remarkable thing was not the bundle. It was everything that had made the bundle seem unnecessary to inspect. Heyman had a room at the Hoffman House, the manor of a person accustomed to credit, and a fortune described in millions. How could scraps of paper carry that much authority? The answer lies in a confidence game built from hotels, servants, borrowed status, and the private certainty of men who believed they could recognize deception. The police biography begins with caution. In Professional Criminals of America, published in 1886, Inspector Thomas Burns identified her maiden name as Bertha Schlesinger and her birthplace as Koblenz, near Posen in Prussia. He wrote that she came to the United States in 1878, married Fritz Karko, lived briefly in New York, and moved to Milwaukee, where she later married a Mr. Heyman. A contemporary newspaper account placed the beginning of her criminal career earlier, so the opening chronology is not perfectly settled. The secure record starts with named complainants, court dates, and amounts after 1880. That distinction matters. Heyman made a profession of supplying plausible biographies. Even official accounts sometimes preserved what witnesses or police believed, rather than what independent records could prove. Heyman did not simply announce that she was rich. She constructed the visible obligations of wealth. Burns recorded elegant quarters at the Windsor and Brunswick hotels, with a maid or manservant in attendance. She spoke easily about prominent men as if they belonged to her circle. Later writer Arthur Griffiths also placed her at the Hoffman House and described the display as central to her method. The request for money came only after the setting had answered the first question. A person who occupied expensive rooms and commanded servants appeared to need a temporary bridge, not charity. The promised fortune was always real enough to be delayed and close enough to justify a loan. Her victims were not buying a fantasy outright. They were advancing money against a future that the present seemed to confirm. In September 1880, Burns recorded a civil suit in New York over $1,035 obtained from E.T. Perrin, a palace car conductor whom Heyman had met while traveling from Chicago. Contemporary reporting supplied the structure of the approach. She represented herself as heir to a large estate and offered Perrin the post of manager. The new position promised more than railway work, and the prospect encouraged him to place money in her hands while the estate remained unavailable. This was a precise use of ambition. Perrin was not merely asked to believe that Heyman was wealthy. He was invited to imagine himself inside that wealth, with a title, duties, and a better income. By the time repayment became urgent, the imagined appointment had already done the work of collateral. The record next crosses borders. Burns wrote that Heyman was arrested in London, Ontario on February 8, 1881, alongside a man called Dr. J.E. Coombs. The charge concerned several $100s allegedly taken from a Montreal commercial traveler through a confidence game. By June, she was before a court in Richmond County, Staten Island. Pauline Schlarbaum, an older resident of Southfield, accused her of obtaining $250 and 2 gold watches. Heyman was acquitted. That result belongs in the story because an accusation is not a conviction, even when later police histories compress the two. It also shows the difficulty of prosecuting a transaction built from persuasion. Money could pass voluntarily, promises could be spoken rather than written, and the false premise might become clear only after the borrower had moved on. The Staten Island acquittal did not end the legal pressure. Burns recorded that police arrested Heyman as she left court on June 29, 1881. New York complaints accused her of obtaining $960 from Charles Brandt, a liquor merchant at 19 Bowery, and $500 from Theodore W. Morris, a glass importer at 27 Chambers Street. The New York Times described how stories of property, inheritance, and temporary shortage supported those advances. Once again, the sums were presented as small gaps inside a much larger fortune. Addresses, occupations, and names now gave prosecutors something firmer than reputation. They could trace who had paid, where the transaction occurred, and what representation had induced it. The confidence game was finally being translated into the slower language of an indictment. Heyman was tried on the Morris indictment and found guilty on October 26, 1881. Burns identified Judge John Cowing and recorded a sentence of 2 years in the penitentiary at the end of that month. The sequence is important. The earlier acquittal concerned Schlarbaum. The conviction concerned Morris. Newspaper summaries sometimes placed every allegation into one continuous legend, but the court outcomes were distinct. Heymanâ Euro-S's method depended on separating appearance from proof. The prosecution succeeded when it could connect a particular payment to a particular false representation. Prison should have broken the machinery of the fraud. It removed the hotels, servants, and travel that had made her stories visible. Instead, the surviving record says that Heyman adapted the same promise of inaccessible wealth to the restrictions of confinement. At Blackwell Euro-S Island Penitentiary, Heyman worked as a servant in the Wardna Euro-S house. There, according to Burns, she became acquainted with Charles Carpe, a German visitor who continued to see her during her confinement. The setting reversed every outward sign she had previously used. There was no luxury hotel and no free movement. Yet imprisonment itself supplied a new obstacle around which a fortune could be imagined. Reports differ slightly on the loss. Burns placed it at $900. A contemporary New York Times account rounded it to about $1,000 and described it as everything Carpe possessed. The range is more honest than a false precision. What remains consistent is that money passed to a convicted confidence woman while she was still inside the institution meant to stop her. The Carpe episode reveals how little physical evidence a confidence game requires when hope has already taken its place. The New York Times reported that Heyman said she needed money to secure her way out of prison. As security, Carpe received a bundle that supposedly contained valuable banking material. When examined, it held old bank books and newspapers sewn into a linen bag. The object resembles the later package at the brokerage because it delayed verification. A wrapped bundle invited the holder to respect the seal and imagine the contents. Opening it too soon could feel like an accusation. Heyman did not need counterfeit securities good enough to survive expert scrutiny. She needed a package good enough to remain closed until she had the money. Trust, not paper, was the real instrument. When police questioned Heyman in July 1883, she offered a motive, or perhaps another performance. The New York Times reported her claim that she had obtained more than $2,000 in the 2 weeks since leaving prison. She said she took no pride in deceiving an ordinary fool. Her preference was for men who thought they could not be skinned, because overcoming their confidence fed her intellectual pride. She also claimed that she wanted the act of getting money more than possession itself, and that much of it would go to the poor. None of those claims can be treated as an audited account. They are valuable for a narrower reason. Heyman understood that the Targeta Euro-S self-image was part of the transaction. The shrewder a man believed himself to be, the more persuasive his own judgment became. After her discharge from Blackwell Euro-S Island, Heyman established herself at the Hoffman House. On June 28, 1883, she visited Edward Saunders of Saunders and Hoffman, brokers at Broadway and Fulton Street. Burns wrote that she first obtained $40 after representing that a substantial check belonging to her was locked in the hotel safe. The explanation was modest beside the fortune she described. That proportion was part of its strength. A request for a small advance seemed almost administrative when measured against millions. More money followed. So did a diamond. The hotel did not prove that Heyman owned a fortune, and the safe did not prove that it contained her check. Each detail merely carried the authority of a place the brokers already recognized. By then, her address had become a financial reference. The surviving accounts do not agree on every figure in the Saunders affair. Burns later tabulated $455 in cash from the firm, along with a valuable diamond. The New York Times reported $255 from Saunders and valued the ring at $300. Both accounts agree on the essential device. Heyman left a sealed package as security and represented its contents as valuable financial paper. They also agree that she spoke of wealth measured in millions. The discrepancies show how quickly a confidence case could grow in retelling, especially when the central story was already theatrical. The careful conclusion is narrower. Saunders and his partner advanced hundreds of dollars and a diamond because the package, the hotel, and Heymanâ Euro-SS performance appeared to support one another. No single prop carried the fraud alone. When the package was opened, it contained waste paper. The apparent securities were not merely overvalued. They were worthless. Heyman was arrested, tried in the Court of General Sessions, and convicted on August 22, 1883. Burns recorded that a request for a new trial was denied and that she received a 5-year penitentiary sentence on August 30th. With full commutation, the term was expected to expire on March 30th, 1887. This is the solved spine of the case. Named brokers transferred property. A sealed package was examined. Its contents contradicted the representation. A jury convicted, and the court imposed sentence. The proof did not require deciding whether every hotel story or boast was false. It required following the specific property, opening the specific package, and matching the result to the promise that obtained the loan. The sealed package from Broadway returns us to the opening question. It carried authority because everyone around it had already supplied the missing value. A prestigious hotel suggested solvency. Servants suggested permanence. Famous names suggested access. The victima Euro's own confidence discouraged inspection. What finally stopped this transaction was an ordinary act of verification. Someone opened the wrapping. The public record that survives is also a set of open packages. Burns preserved a portrait and a police chronology in 1886. Newspapers preserved interviews, accusations, and conflicting sums. Later accounts repeated both the facts and the legend, and newspapers reported Heymanâ Euro's death in Chicago in 1901. Read carefully. Those records do not produce a flawless biography. They produce something more useful. They show where the evidence is firm, where it diverges, and how Bertha Heyman repeatedly turned the appearance of wealth into credit.